Harry hum, dra, heri, heri, hadri, he, hum, hedum, hadri, Harry hum, da, hadum, hedum, hadri, da, hri, hum, hedum, ri.
Well, thank you all very much for coming, and welcome, as Matt said, to the Edinburgh People's Festival's 5th Hamish Henderson Memorial Lecture. And I wanted to say right at the very beginning, on behalf of us all who are part of the Edinburgh People's Festival, we want to record our immense gratitude and respect to Hamish Henderson, who wasn't only just one of the founders of the original People's Festival back in 1951, he's also very much the guiding spirit of the current People's Festival that was established in his memory in 2002 when he sadly passed away. I have the pleasure of delivering this 5th Hamish Henderson Memorial Lecture. We had obviously 4 before, this is why it's the 5th. And we started with his biographer Timothy Neat, gave the inaugural lecture 4 years ago. Thereafter we had Dr. Fred Freeman, who was his colleague at Edinburgh University School of Scottish Studies. Then we had the former MSP Campbell Martin, and last year we had Hamish's fellow poet and friend Tessa Ransford. So this year we decided to break with tradition. That is, after all, what traditions are for, isn't it? And speak not so much about Hamish's life, the man himself and his many achievements, but rather the ongoing relevance of the values that he lived his life by, if I can put it that way. And I've entitled this lecture La Lotta Continua. For anybody who speaks Italian, my apologies, probably the worst Italian I've ever heard, but it means the struggle continues, and it's to reflect the fact that the struggle for working class emancipation and socialism that Hamish dedicated his life to, and I have dedicated my life to, is ongoing. And I think the Italian language is appropriate here, since Hamish Henderson's ties with Italy are deep and profound. So, notwithstanding my intentions to focus primarily on his beliefs, I realise it's part of my job tonight to introduce Hamish Henderson to those perhaps who have not yet been acquainted with him, and to explain why it is we think it's important enough to commemorate him in the way that we do. So allow me at the beginning to provide a brief introduction which will hopefully encourage people to further inquiries about who Hamish Henderson was. The man himself was, to say the least, a poet, a folk singer, a folk song collector, an intellectual in the best sense of the phrase, a linguist, a songwriter, musician, and a political activist. He was a socialist, an internationalist, an advocate of independence, and a supporter of a modern democratic republic for Scotland. And these are the themes that I want to address in my remarks tonight. But Hamish Henderson was born in Blairgowrie, Perthshire in 1919, the illegitimate son of a single mother. He was educated under a scholarship at Dulwich School in South London, where he lived in an orphanage, having lost his parents by that time. He was a bright boy who went on to secure a scholarship to Downing College, Cambridge, where he studied modern languages. And after graduating from university in 1939, he enlisted and served as an intelligence officer in the British Army during World War II. As a combat soldier in the Second World War, he saw active service in North Africa and Italy. And he wrote the hauntingly beautiful set of poems, The Elegies for the Dead and Siren Acre, and later referred to the Battle of El Alamein, that I'm sure people have heard of. But Hamish referred to the Battle of El Alamein in his usual inimitable way, claiming it as Scotland's greatest gift to the world. A peculiar claim, you might think. The claim was based on an attempt to highlight the heroic and indeed pivotal contribution that Highland regiments amongst the British 8th Army had made in the most decisive and pivotal victory over Rommel in the deserts of North Africa. And I have to say, I found that reference to Scotland's greatest gift in the world perhaps typical of Hamish, but I found it only having found reference he describes in a pamphlet that we have here that the Edinburgh Festival is Scotland's second greatest contribution to the world. So you inevitably would understand I haven't found what the second greatest contribution to the world is. I was curious to find out what the first was. and it is, you'll be relieved to know, the Battle of El Alamein. And after North Africa, the British forces went on to Italy, if I can put it that way. And Hamish, in Italy, a fluent Italian speaker, fought alongside the communist partisans and took the formal surrender of Field Marshal Graziani, the head of the Italian army, in 1945. And so proud was he of having this document, the surrender of the Italian army, that he kept it for the rest of his life in his wallet and showed it to anybody who was keen enough to see it and keen enough to look at it. But the partisans, and his time with the partisans in Italy, influenced Hamish Henderson enormously as a young man, as you might imagine, not least of all because of their unyielding heroics in combating the Nazis, both Italian and German, but also in introducing him to the work of great Italian scholars such as the late Communist Party leader in Italy and Marxist intellectual Antonio Gramsci. And Gramsci was to be an abiding influence throughout Hamish Henderson's life. But I also want to give you a flavour of his wit and his intelligence also. In a biting reply to the ghastly ignorance and arrogance of Lady Astor, the Tory MP, who claimed in 1945 that only those Allied soldiers who participated in the Normandy landings were entitled to heroic celebration in Britain, Hamish wrote The D-Day Dodgers, the story of the brave and heroic soldiers in Monte Cassino and Italy and elsewhere to ensure that they got rightfully their place in commemorating the victory of Britain over the forces of fascism. Hamish was an active socialist throughout his life. He was a Republican, a Marxist, and an internationalist, as well as a very gifted poet, folk singer, intellectual, polymath and linguist who spoke several languages. And he was, I think it's fair to say, as we all are, a product of our time and place. And unlike many others we could mention, he remained a man of the left, true to his socialist ideas, internationalism and republicanism his entire life. I couldn't say hand in heart that his colleagues in the time that he was active in the socialist movement from the 1940s and 50s onwards did the same. But he died in 2002, and in doing so unwittingly inspired what might be termed the Rifondazione, if I can put it that way, which is a reference to the refounded Communist Party in Italy. But Hamish helped to refound the Edinburgh People's Festival in death, because it was in an attempt to commemorate his life that we brought together the Edinburgh People's Festival in 2002, thinking it would be a one-off, one-night celebration at the Jack Cain Centre in Craigmillar. And here we are 10 years later, still ongoing. And I have to say, I look back with some pride in the many achievements of the Edinburgh People's Festival these last 10 years, not least of all because we shared and have continued to share Hamish's ideals of equality and the widest possible access to the arts and culture for the people of this city. Our 5th Hamish Henderson Memorial Lecture then stands alongside 8 years of comedy at the BMC Club in Gorgie, a presence in those parts of Edinburgh the world's greatest arts festival never seems to venture into. Our shows in Craigmillar, Wester Hailes, Muirhouse, Gilmerton, Birdie House, Portobello, Dalkeith, Gorgie, Leith, St Leonard's, the Inch, the Grassmarket, the South Side, Saughton Prison, the Royal Infirmary and elsewhere are still talked about, and I think that's a mark of our contribution to Hamish's spirit. In this year's Edinburgh People's Festival, and there's a flyer I've left in your chair, we've described as a recession-busting festival. And we've done so because it's to reflect these are straitened times for working people. And we've presented this year all our shows, including this one, are free of charge, you were relieved to hear. I should say in passing that this, in truth, this bargain is not as generous as it might first seem. Since the last 10 years, there's never been a ticket to any of the Edinburgh People's Festival events that have cost you more than £2, so you've saved £2 this year. Every little helps, as they say somewhere else. And we are grateful to the city's trade union movement for its generous and continued financial support in this regard. They've helped the Edinburgh People's Festival this time round, just as they did in the 1950s. So let me turn, if I can, to the essence of this lecture tonight, to Hamish Henderson's 4 central beliefs and ideas, his proud socialist convictions, his internationalism, his support for Scottish independence and his support for a modern democratic republic. And I'm bound to say, in the 10 years since Hamish Henderson died, the economy in Britain, after 25 years or so of uninterrupted growth, has now plunged into recession, which began, as you know, in 2008. And that recession, often nowhere near adequately reflected in the mass media of this country, has brought untold misery, suffering, hardship and downright degradation for millions of people, young and old, and had the most profound effect, in my belief, in political consciousness in this country. And it's fair to say that socialists like Hamish Henderson long expected the recession, because that recession and this recession, which they're now predicting may last for the best part of this decade to 2020, is an inevitable feature of the contradictions inherent within capitalism. The boom between 1990 to 2008 was artificially created, prolonged by access to unprecedented credit. And people had been encouraged, myself, yourselves included, had been encouraged, nay, forced, even into borrowing astronomical sums of money throughout the 1980s and 90s to buy a house, because you couldn't get a council house, to put it on your credit cards, for housing, for holidays, for purchases, and many people quite unaware of the problems that they were about to defer. For our parents' generation, remember, such options were closed off to us. Credit was something working people couldn't get. But for that period of time, it was unleashed. It was, have a credit card, Mr. Fox, have another credit card, have another 5,000 on your mortgage for a holiday, for a purchase. And of course now we've got enormous levels of indebtedness where the tiger has snapped back. And in 2008 the inevitable happened. The elastic snapped. The recession, which most bourgeois, as Hamish would call them, pro-capitalist economists denied was ever possible, returned with a vengeance. And I have to say, in reading the 2-volume biography of Hamish that Timothy Neat wrote, there's a couple of references to a young rector at Edinburgh University called Gordon Brown. And they speak in high regard to the young Gordon Brown, who was a close friend and an admirer of Hamish Henderson. I think in recent times, the image that I have uppermost of Gordon Brown is the man at the helm for oh so long as the Chancellor and Prime Minister of this country, who looks ever so foolish now looking back on it, who alleged and claimed at the dispatch box something similar to this at Westminster, that the boom and bust cycle of capitalism was ended forever. This is a learned man, we're told. He looks awfully foolish now in the aftermath of the recession. And the same experts who predicted it never happened are only now accepting this as a recession that may well bumble along, and we might see, as I said, for 10 years, exacerbated by the so-called austerity measures of the condemned government. But behind this bland statements of recession and austerity, of course, is the economic hardship that bites deeper and deeper and deeper into the lives of working people, whether it's fuel poverty or pensioner poverty or child poverty or the fallen standards of the living, forcing people into decisions the likes of what they've not witnessed in the previous 25 years. And I have to say, I'm mindful of those people in the 25 years of the boom who never saw any sign of it, whose lifestyle and living standards during the boom wasn't great, and now of course they're first in line to suffer during the recession. The poor, the disadvantaged, the vulnerable and therefore exploitable sections of working people who've witnessed an appalling collapse in their living standards, and as I say, they're likely to suffer even more now the recession is bitten. And let's celebrate in a bookshop like this other writers and contributors. I've seen recently a quote attributed to the great Noam Chomsky, who writes brilliantly to remind us that the left seems to be the only people who have collective memory nowadays, who remember before the boom, who remember what it is to the 1930s when they're comparing the recession of today to then, because of its depth, its wide-scale provisions, and the fact that it lasted for 10 years, and perhaps worryingly most of all, the depression, the economic recession in the 1930s, let's not forget, was only ended by a world war, rearmament on all sides, which is a fundamentally horrifying prospect. But the fundamental truism accepted by all socialists, Hamish included, is that if the only thing we needed for socialism to succeed was brutal inequalities and poverty, then I'm afraid we would have had it a long, long time ago. Consciousness is the key here. An understanding of how the world around us works, and Hamish Henderson had it. He had an appreciation of how it works and moreover how it can be improved. And I have to say, looking at the rightward retreat of social democracy and the labour movement internationally over the last 30 years, it's clear the socialist task is that bit more difficult even than in Hamish Henderson's heyday, because working people have understandably lost confidence in those organisations and their abilities to change things, and the ideological surrender of people like Gordon Brown and others have hardly helped. These leaders, Brown, Blair, we could go through the Western world and further afield, these leaders fell hook, line and sinker for the fiction peddled by philosophers like Francis Fukuyama, another whose book was probably once under some demand in this bookshop, whose book The End of History and the Last Man, published in 1992, triumphantly exclaimed free market capitalism had become the final form of human government, and concluded that following the collapse of the Soviet Union, capitalism had triumphed over its socialist foes and all others. And perhaps like Gordon Brown, you don't hear much of Francis Fukuyama nowadays, do you? I wonder why. The truth is, the Western world's recession, for which Anglo-Saxon banking collapse and this city played a prominent role in, more than most, was the catalyst that changed the parameters of the global ideological offensive. And so today, it's not Francis Fukuyama people are searching for in the bookshops, like Word Power and elsewhere, but it's to Marx that the scholars now seek their references. And I've seen a watch, as you probably do yourself, YouTube videos where people from all over the world consider Marx in the 21st century, and they talk about how global capitalism today has higher degrees of centralisation of capital than at any time in all history, and has inflicted the financialisation of the globe. Neoliberalism, a term that for me is far too benign to describe the brutality, barbarism and horrors it inflicts on the majority of the world's people, is nonetheless the dominant ideology worshipped by corporate capitalism today. And the wealthy, let's not forget, never give up their riches or power willingly. And socialism for us, for Hamish Henderson, for those who follow in that tradition, means ending the grotesque inequalities that capitalism inevitably brings, where the basics of life are denied to billions of people, yet capitalism provides billions for a tiny, self-elected, privileged elite. Socialism for Hamish Henderson and for those who follow in that tradition means public ownership over privatisation. It means there can be no place for the free market in the provision of essential services to the world's population, like feeding the world, like primary health care, education, transport, housing, water, as well as the essential utilities that we need to survive. These are the basic necessities and denied increasingly to billions of people across the world. And some key questions arise. Since Marx, Hamish knew, Karl Marx, he knew that working people essentially the world over have two cards to play in the great class struggle in front of us. They have the ability to withdraw their labour, to stop working, and to show that they're in the generation of all wealth. And they have the ability to do so collectively, because one person withdrawing his labour, anybody who's worked in a workplace realise individual goes on strike is little difference. We do it collectively, we have greater strength. And I think the prospects for socialism today, this isn't the place for me to develop that theme in any great detail. It's a complex question which I don't have the time to develop and rightly won't here. But the questions arise is, will working class people, the ultimately progressive force in society, fight back against the pronounced downward pressure on their living standards and the power of corporate capitalism? Or will they acquiesce and succumb to despair? Where are the working class organisations today capable of carrying these tasks forward? These are the questions confronting us here. These are the questions perhaps confronting the socialists throughout time. And I want to say that Hamish Henderson, as an internationalist, was undoubtedly someone who took an interest in the world around him. And taking an interest in the world around you means standing up and speaking out against tyranny all over the world. It means understanding Scotland's role in the world and Britain's role in the world. Why is Britain the 5th richest country in the world? Why is Britain amongst the most belligerent and imperialist nations on earth? And indeed, are these two questions related? How does Britain's imperial plunder determine our national interest as described by William Hague and David Cameron? And I have to say that Hamish Henderson was a proud anti-imperialist. And the song that we will sing at the end, the Freedom Come All Ye, he reminds us of a side of Scotland that few of our politicians would admit to. That we remain, unfortunately, one of the world's most belligerent nations, one of the world's biggest weapons manufacturers, warmongers, Britain. Today, Britain is occupying Afghanistan in the world's most brutal conflict, and we do so against the express wishes of 33 million Afghans. There are Scottish soldiers there just now. There are Scottish weapons being fired in that conflict. We, Britain, Scottish soldiers were involved in the invasion of Iraq in 2002, a sovereign country in which we had no legal or moral right to be present, and where upwards of 500,000 innocent people have died. Arms manufacturing, Britain, the 5th biggest in the world. Indeed, if we look around Scotland, and perhaps you've done this yourself, in Edinburgh, around Scotland, show me where there's any volume manufacturing in this country that isn't related to the arms industry. The Ferry Road in Edinburgh, British Aerospace, Rapier missile systems, Ferranti's, Marconi, Rosyth Dockyard, a naval dockyard fitting naval submarines. John Brown's, the old John Brown's Govan shipyard in Yarrows in the Clyde, British Aerospace and defence contracts. Faslane nuclear base in the Clyde. They say 16,000 people involved in work there. It's not difficult to see Scotland's contribution to the world today. Nowhere near as proud as the Battle at El Alamein. Nowhere near as proud as the Edinburgh Festival. And I remember when I was in the Scottish Parliament arguing that Scotland should jettison nuclear weapons. We should get rid of them. They're an affront to the people of this country. It's an affront to us that there of 9 countries in the world with nuclear weapons, we're one of them. And my Labour colleagues would turn around and say, but Colin, if you get rid of those nuclear weapons, there's 16,000 people relying on that naval base for their jobs. And I remember saying to them, you know, that moves me not a jot. It reminds me of the arguments that must certainly have been offered to Wilberforce during the time of slavery. You can imagine it. We've got to get rid of slavery, says Wilberforce and other progressives. And along comes the union guy saying, you can't get rid of slavery. My members drive those slaves to market. There are some industries and jobs Scotland shouldn't have and we shouldn't touch. That was a belief that Hamish Henderson shared throughout his whole life. And I have to say, in the debate that's currently taking place in Scotland and within the confines of the Scottish National Party as to whether an independent Scotland will be part of NATO or not, one of the profound questions that jumps out at me repeatedly, and I'm sure would jump out at Hamish if he was here, is who is it we're defending ourselves from? We're the belligerents here. We're the ones who threaten the rest of the world. I've been campaigning for a long time, and us here, I'm sure, against the war in Afghanistan, and I've had many occasions where ex-servicemen, people who fought in the war like Hamish did, and subsequently will say to me, you know, son, I look at the British occupation of Afghanistan, and what makes me feel the most uneasy is I fought in the Second World War against the Nazis who were occupying France and Norway and Denmark, elsewhere. They were occupying Europe, Poland, Czechoslovakia. We fought to liberate those countries. Here we are in the 21st century in 2012, and we are the occupiers. We are occupying these countries. We're not on the side of the angels. And I believe that's a profound reason as to why the majority of the population in Scotland are opposed to the continued occupation of that country and want to see those soldiers brought back home. And in my view, Scots are not comfortable with either the Labour
as a member of the Scottish Parliament elected in 2003, I well remember being told that if I didn't swear an oath of allegiance to the Queen, then I don't care what the people of the Lothians voted for, I wasn't getting to take my seat. And every MSP and every MP in Britain faces the same conundrum. You can take your seat, but only after you swear an oath of allegiance to the Queen, her heirs and successors. And I, as a socialist Republican, were not about to do it. And modesty prevents me from telling you what I did. You remember I sang some Robert Burns and they sent me to the back of the queue. And I had my 2 kids in the gallery at the time, and Laura went to school the next day and they said, "Laura, what did you do yesterday?" "Oh, I went to see my dad getting sworn into the Scottish Parliament." "What happened?" She says, "He got through because his singing was so bad." She was only 5. Anyway, but the fact of the matter is the Queen has immense powers in this country. Every bill the Scottish Parliament passes has to be signed by her. Every bill the Westminster Parliament passes has to be sent by her. You and probably remember, after the last general election and that interregnum between Labour were talking to the Liberals were talking to the Tories, everybody's talking, and eventually David Cameron jumps in a car and goes to Buckingham Palace to ask the Queen's permission to form a government. Now that was only, that was a symbol of the power she has perhaps, but this is the woman who's the head of the armed services. This is the woman who's the head of the judiciary in this country. This is the woman who has Privy Council powers. She appoints all the Privy Councillors, and by the way, if you look into what Privy Councillors are immensely important in the constitution of this country. Prime Ministers appoint Privy Councillors through the Queen. They sit there, they're called ever so irregularly. The Queen calls them. The Queen calls the meetings together. And the Queen has, in the Crown powers, quite frankly, powers that the Arab tyrants in the Middle East would only dream of. And in time-honoured fashion, the monarchists in this country try to proclaim the moral high ground by arguing that they're defending democracy, they're defending the powers of the people with their undemocratic practices. And they'll say, who wants another politician as the head of state? In 2003, when I went on a speaking tour of Australia and New Zealand, not long after Australia had voted in a referendum, did I mention the word? A referendum. They voted to keep the monarchy in 2003, and I remember going there in November, and I said, understand, meetings in Sydney and Melbourne and Hobart and Brisbane, everywhere else, I said, understand, you've just had a referendum to keep the Queen. Well, I'm being sent here by the people of Scotland to tell you if you want her, you can keep her, but only on the grounds that we'll pay the fare and it's a single ticket and you have her. But the argument that was used by the monarchists in Australia was, well, I know the Queen's crap and all that, we never see her, but the alternative would be even worse. You would have a politician as the head of state, and who wants that? The inference being here that the Queen's no political. And of course the idea that we don't have democracy. And for me, this brings the arguments to the monarchists, the people who defend the monarchy. This is an argument, a debate that needs to be had. It needs to be had maturely, and it has to be based on a democratic understanding of where we are at and how democracy has to advance in this country. The argument, the most risible perhaps, that you hear about the Queen is she brings a lot of tourists to this country. Well, frankly, so does Edinburgh Zoo nowadays. But we don't hear anybody wanting to crown the pandas, do we? So I would like to say that as far as those of us who favour a modern democratic republic are concerned, the arguments of our opponents being so facile and weak should give us enormous encouragement. And I want to say this, if I can say so in finishing. Hamish Henderson died in 2002, and his passing then was the stimulus for a re-examination of society and our values. And I would say that the 10th anniversary of his death offers us another opportunity. Who says Hamish Henderson's values and beliefs are out of date today? Not me. Not me. Hamish Henderson was a working class intellectual. He was a thinker who placed his faith ultimately in the working class. He studied, he read, he used his intelligence and his ability to challenge authority and its conventions. He offered himself to progressive causes as he saw them. And in this regard, he took the advice of Karl Marx, who concluded that philosophers have merely interpreted the world. The point, however, is to change it. In other words, ideas are invaluable and essential for understanding the world, but activists are necessary to improve it. And Hamish was both. He was a thinker and he was an activist. And I want to leave you with this thought. Tariq Ali said recently that hope makes you active, despair makes you passive. And I think that's ever so true. The movement, the ideas, the beliefs that Hamish Henderson promoted make you hope, make you want to be active. He understood the struggle and he dedicated his life to it because there is no better. The movement is everything and the struggle ensues. Long live the socialist cause, long live our internationalism, democracy, and long live the Edinburgh People's Festival. Thank you.
Towards the end, when you were raising the issue of republicanism and the qualms that people have about having an elected head of state, you know, we frequently hear about the horrible thought of having a President Blair representing us as head of state and so on. It's something that prompts me to think, well, do we really have to aim so low? Could we not have our very own President Václav Havel or Lech Walesa, someone who has the kind of moral authority from the people to represent the nation, the kind of person who, had he lived to see the great day of independence, Hamish Henderson himself could perhaps have been. It's difficult to think of anyone in Scottish public life who does have that kind of authority, perhaps because in our popular culture we kind of squeeze intellectuals and thinking people off and prefer to put various vacuous people who shout very loudly on television in their place. But can you think of anyone who could take that kind of role as an antidote, in a sense, to the President Blair nightmares that people present to Republicans?
Can everybody else ever go first? in a democratic spirit, you tell me. Who would you nominate?
But again, that's not asking you. I would have said Hamish Henderson, but he's deep. So,
yeah. I mean, I think that's something I'd welcome everybody's contribution on. I'm sure it's a brilliant question. I mean, to be honest with you, I think if it was held today, Sir Chris Hoy would probably win it, but that's to do with the media's coverage of the Olympics or so. But not wishing to skip the question, I'll give it some thought in the next few minutes. The key thing for me is that the president, whoever they are, men or women, should be elected by the people. So, I mean, I would have preferences, but I would be happy to live if it was somebody else. It wasn't my choice, provided that they're democratically elected and that they're accountable to the people, and their actions, they're conducted on behalf of the people. And, you know, if the people have issues with how they act, and if a majority of people are opposed to it, then they're recallable. They'd be the principles. But give me a few minutes and ask some more questions, and I'll see what I can come up with.
Well, if I could just come back on that, that's the main thing. It's not who it is, it's how they got there and how you get rid of them if they don't continue to do what they're supposed to be doing. And I think you don't need to look very much further than Scotland's recent socialist history to look at the dangers of thinking that charisma and the right person can lead you in the wrong direction. And I don't want to go into that too much tonight, but if Tommy Sheridan had been more accountable and more recallable and not be relying upon his very great personality and charisma, that, you know, socialism in Scotland might have been in a slightly different place today from where it is. So it's really not so much who the person is, it's who elected them, how they got elected, and how recallable and accountable they are. And that way, you know, the actual personality of the person is less important than what they stand for.
I think one of the things that strikes me, you know, in that office of the president, you know, some countries it's entirely it's like a mayor, it's a titular position, it has no authority, there's no power in it or anything like that. And that's fine, I'm not criticising it. There are other presidencies clearly where in the constitution it is a powerful position, directly elected by the people. That's for us to consider, that's for us to discuss and decide, isn't it? What powers are devolved to the presidential office, what it's responsible for, what areas of society that we deem is fit for appropriate for a president to oversee, and which would remain in a parliament. I think those are perfectly legitimate discussions that I imagine take place throughout the world. The trouble is, not too many countries in the world have the discussion we have, which is to say you can't have any president with any powers, any elections. And if I can say this one thing, sometimes, you know, you have that outer body experience. Sometimes it's better to leave the country and then see how the rest of the world sees Scotland or Britain, and be reminded that monarchs are extremely unusual in the world. You have rarities. You know, America doesn't have a monarch. Germany doesn't have a monarch. France got rid of its monarch. You know, so before you know it, Britain's constitution is peculiar. They're defending something that's outmoded, not particularly, you know, shared by the rest of the world either. But I'm still thinking in your answer. Susan Boyle came to mind, but that was just a just an idea.
Do you have further questions? I mean, for me, the issue of personality politics is, you know, what's the problem? You know, our system today is highlighted with the fact that Tony Blair, you know, personality. He became the leader of the Labour Party, and he led the Labour Party. He led the Labour Party by the nose into an illegal war. You know what I mean? So it's not so much about personalities, it's about what kind of power that personality holds in relation to, you know, what's happening in the rest of the world in terms of the services that you enjoy and things like that. So for me, the issue personality politics is a no-brainer. You know, it shouldn't be.
I love in the Freedom Commodity that Hamish talks about the Brumie Law, and he talks about Clyde at a time when people were leaving Scotland to go and live in other countries. And I think as I've gotten older, because I'm from the Clyde, and when I was first born we lived in a block of flats overlooking the Clyde, and in 1962 you would see the Clyde covered with tugs and the shipbuilding for the merchant shipping that was going on in that river until Mrs Thatcher decided that it was going to be a military river in the 1980s. And I think for me it's become more and more important that we get rid of these weapons on the Clyde. I'm shocked to see that people are thinking we won't get rid of these weapons on the Clyde, but I don't think Scotland fully realises that we have lost a merchant river. We now have a military river from 1955 when those bastards took those weapons into Fast Lane. And one of the things that I will always love Tommy Sheridan about is all the times he went to jail, and actually went to jail to say that we have to get rid of these weapons. I would love to think that as we move towards a proper debate on independence, that people take the Clyde back. Because I think we're losing that. People don't realise that that river was connected to Hebrides, to America, Australia, but it's now just a military river. What do you think Hamish would have to say about all that, Colin?
Well, I think it'd be absolutely on your side of the case. I mean, there's a number of things you raised there. The thing I was focused on when you mentioned the Brumie Law, he talks in the Freedom Commodity about kids watching as their fathers sail down the Clyde and they go to war. Of course, the other thing about the Brumie Law is kids watched family members sailing off to America, to Canada, to South Africa, Australia, elsewhere. And I don't know if you noticed, I'm sure you did, last week or the week before they announced that Scotland's population has never been higher. 5.25 million people now live here, and it's almost entirely explainable by the people who've come and chosen to live in this country from abroad. I mean, I'm staggered, I have to say. You know, people probably, I'm 3 days a week, 4 days a week, usually in a megaphone in Princes Street. I know people have seen me there, but the amount of young Spaniards that I meet. I met another one today from Madrid signing our petition condemning the bankers' corruption and greed in Britain, and saying to me, you've got no idea about corruption and greed until you've seen the Spanish banks. But I mean, I have no statistics available on this, but I wouldn't be at all surprised if the Spanish population in this city is one of the fastest growing, particularly because unemployment in Spain is 50% or more if you're under 25. And I mention this because I'm annoyed, anxious, the debate in Scotland about immigration is. I'm from Motherwell. You were saying you're from Glasgow, and Motherwell. I'm from the steel town. My grandpa was a steel worker, and one of the things they do with molten steel is when you heat it up, all the impurities rise to the surface, all the scum comes to the top. And I have to say that in the debate in Scotland and immigration, you've seen scum rising to the top, which is these people should go back to where they came from. You know, we don't want the Poles, we don't want this, we don't want that. And you say to them, how on earth can that idea gain hold in a country like ours, where our history and tradition for hundreds of years was about leaving here to improve ourselves in another part of the world? And I think Scots would be absolutely beside themselves if they thought that their ancestors who went to Australia, New Zealand, Canada, America, Europe, wherever else, were getting that welcome in that city where they arrived in that people tried to give to the Poles, to the Spaniards. It's horrifying. I'm not despairing, but there's a job of work to be done by those of us who celebrate multiculturalism, who celebrate the fact that if people from Poland and Spain come to this city, it stands to reason we're better off. They bring their wealth, they bring their talent, they're a human being who are making this city richer. Unfortunately for Poland, it makes it Poland poorer. And that's an argument progressives and the left have to get over to celebrate that. But on the issue of, nuclear weapons, I was at a meeting last week, Trident Ploughshares organised, which is they're trying to lobby the SNP conference coming up in a few weeks' time not to change its position in NATO. And I'll not go there because I mentioned it already, but Trident Ploughshares, of course, takes its name from the concept that we have these weapons and we want to get rid of them, so we want to take the skills involved in manufacturing nuclear weapons of mass destruction and turn them into making ploughshares, making wheelchairs, making computers, making technology that's progressive rather than annihilating. And that's something you support, I support, Hamish supported. And I have to say, given its head and given its place and given a proper argument, I'm confident a majority of Scots would rather that there was 16,000 people on the Clyde making technology for people with, whatever needs, rather than threatening the rest of the world with nuclear annihilation. So my feeling is, I felt this a lot, I'm sure you might agree, the politicians in this country, from the main parties, I'm bound to say this in the Scottish Socialist Party, and I know you'll forgive me for it, but they don't serve the population's wishes at all well. The population of this country don't support giving more money to the bankers, they don't support nuclear weapons, they don't support, I believe they don't support the Queen and the monarchy. But yet none of those parties give voice to that. And that's something that has to be changed in my view. And I try my best to change it. So who's come up with presidential candidates? Come on. Own up. Somebody there wants to say Lulu. I know you do. The bar. Somebody wants to say Groundskeeper Willie for the Simpsons. First cartoon president in the world, eh? I'd vote for him. Working class janitor, what can you say?
I'm not coming up with a presidential candidate, but just to open up the debate a wee bit, if we've been talking, 5, certainly 10 years ago, and you were talking about what we meant by independent Scotland, virtually anybody in the room, and that would include SNP members, would say automatically, first of all, we'll be getting rid of a monarchy. You'd say automatically, Faslane, that goes, and before that, it did go Holylock, it went anyhow. That would just be common shades. And when it came to wars, even Alex Salmond, I remember, posed a pretty hard war to oppose. They called it war in Kosovo. Yeah, it was easier to oppose the Iraq war, but he certainly opposed that. One of the things we now see, though, is that the Yes campaign is run by the SNP, and the SNP is throwing over every one of these policies to the extent to which it's going finer and finer, the paper divide you can put between the unionists on one side and the nationalists on the other. When you saw when Salmond accepted the monarchy, I don't know if you saw Salmond's statement about the Jubilee this year. It wasn't just a passing off hand statement. It was fawning sycophancy of the worst order I've ever seen. Johan Lammert's statement was actually sounded like a closet Republican compared with Salmond's. We now see this whole thing building up about dropping NATO. the person who's in charge of the Yes campaign is the person who's in charge of ditching NATO. Not only that, he's made it quite clear that in actual fact he doesn't think we'll get rid of Tridentinium. They're not going to ditch that policy, but that's, you know, that's part and parcel. When it comes to you know, who we're looking at, you know, what's the economy going to be like? Well, we know to begin with, we thought we'd get social democracy courtesy to the Royal Bank of Scotland. Simon and George Matthews and like that, that's gone by the board. They've had to ditch that. But Amazon has just been invited to do a contract settlement business in Fife. On what basis, Amazon? Oh, you won't have to pay any taxes. Well, there's Amazon. Amazon is just a company that over in Greenock is known for being viciously anti-union. When it brings people on short-term contracts at 2 o'clock in the morning, oh, I haven't got work for you, go back home. That's 5 miles away from anywhere you can get home on. The sort of things you might have said, would we end up anti-trade union laws? That's not even discussed. So in many ways, I mean, no, the unionists, you know, following neoliberalism and are going down at a rapid pace. But the problem is the S&P is actual fact, you know, maybe 4 or 5 years behind, but going in the same direction. So there's nothing automatic about independence being good for us. It's only if we organise, because at the moment all the pressure on the so-called Independence Party is from the right, and the S&P is retreating in a rightward pattern. We've yet to see the evidence going the other way. One thing that gives me hope this week is find that the young nationalists have said, we're going to oppose that policy at that. And the lobby you mentioned, I hope that's a bloody big lobby at that policy, because the fight back has to start to reclaim that so it does benefit us.
Well, let me just say a couple of things. First of all, there's a debate tomorrow night on independence, and I don't want you, you know, thinking if you come tonight we'll somehow we'll just be watching a repeat tomorrow night, right? But on broad issues, I think what you've touched on is an inevitable. There's a debate that's now going on about what kind of independence are we going to have, and I think that's really good in a way, because it begins to see that people are grappling with the concept. It's no longer alien, it's no longer strange. They're saying, okay, Scotland could be independent, so what would it look like? And I think you're getting people who are both for it and against it grappling with that question. If it's like this, I'm against independence. If it's like that, I'll be in favour of it. In my view, and I think you make a really telling point here, the independence movement, because that's what it is grappling. It's in a tug of war, if that's a Olympic analogy, and it's been pulled in different ways, isn't it? Potentially, it's quite clear that the SNP. I watch Alex Salmond, and he seems to be saying, and you know, the French phrase is, the more things change, the more they stay the same. And he's exuding this idea that don't worry about independence, it'll be the same as it is the new. So don't worry about independence to the Royal Bank of Scotland. You'll still make plenty of money. Don't worry, Amazon. You'll still be able to pay people buttons in Dunfermline under independence. So Salmon's making it clear. I think his calculation is, look, people are frightened of independence, and if we make them less frightened, they'll vote for it. My argument would be, people have to be inspired. It's a national liberation struggle. It has to be saying to people, we are offering an entirely different vision of how things are. And I have to say that I look forward to the next 2 years. There's obviously one debate between the yes and the no camp. And you know, reading every time I say something about independence, the Scotsman will go, big split in yes campaign, right? And then of course you've got the Liberals and Tories have just the daggers drawn this week, ain't they? You backstabber, you've sold out my plans for the House of Lords, that's right, I'm not voting for boundary changes. And then within the independence movement you've got a very profound debate, and I think you're rightly touching it, which is to say, what's this going to mean? Because in my view, I would have to say, and I try to say this candidly and frankly to get the message over, but if I thought working people were going to be worse off under independence, I wouldn't be in favour of it. Why would you? Why would I say to, you know, my granny or my aunties and uncles, yeah, look, independence will mean there's more people dying of fuel poverty, and the more kids living in fuel poverty, but at least we can paint or sell in wood and, you know, busk with a bagpipe on Princess Street and nobody can bother us. For me, it's a material question. I want to see Scotland's long-term chronic inequalities and injustices addressed, and my belief is that independence does that. But I'm not naive enough to think that Alex Salmond agrees with me, or what's his name, Angus Robertson. There'll be a debate, there'll be an engagement, and I think I have to say that my sense is, and I sit on the Yes Scotland Advisory Board, and my belief will be, I say at those meetings, I say at this meeting, working class people in Scotland will determine the outcome of that vote. We are the majority. If working people can be persuaded independence is in their best interest, they'll vote for it.
and will win the referendum. If they can't be persuaded it's in their best interest, they're going to be better off, it'll mean better jobs, better housing, better chances for their kids, you know, then they won't vote for it. And we don't deserve to win it. So that's the debate for me, and I look forward to it, because I think the socialist case, the idea of saying to working people you're better off, is the right place to be. I wouldn't want to be chapping doors in the inch where I stay and say, look, I'm asking you to vote for independence, but it means you're going to be humptied for the next 20 years, you're going to live in, you know, 3 bobbies and a hula hoop or whatever it is. It's not going to be that. The argument for me is going to be, we're on the right side. I think I've looked at the scale of the debate, and I think the polls suggest if it was held today, the referendum would be lost. But there's 2 years to go. We're involved in the worst recession in 80 years. You give people a vision of a better world, and they'll vote for it.
You said 2 interesting things related. You said that the wealthy will never willingly part with their wealth.
Mm-hmm.
And you said that part of the argument now is not that you can't manage on your own, but you'd be better off with us. The Alistair Darling argument that, oh yes, Scotland could manage on its own, but you'd be better off if you stay with us.
Mm-hmm.
The truth of the matter, I think, is that Westminster, the rest of the UK, England, or whatever, they're afraid they'll be worse off without us.
Mm-hmm.
They know they'll be worse off without us. You've just said the huge military complex that we're part of, which is the financial basis of wealth in this country, as you very clearly made the case. And they won't part with their wealth, and their wealth resides in Scotland. So there's going to be, I mean, we've no idea of the secret machinations that will go on to prevent us being independent. It's my feeling.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I'd say that the British ruling class, if I can talk in those terms, that I understand as a socialist, they made it absolutely clear as clear can be. They're against this. They don't want Scotland to be breaking away.
Because they will suffer in their pockets, they think.
Oh, in 1,000 different ways. They'll say, for example, well, Scotland breaks away for the United Kingdom. Have you seen them referring to it as RUK? Not FC UK, but RUK, in which they mean rest of the UK. So they're saying if Scotland breaks away from the rest of the UK, so you have Scotland and the rest of the UK, then we're not the power we are in the world. Maybe our United Nations Security Council seats up for grabs. You know, will companies still want to come here? But you know, there's a many facets to it. And I think it's very wise what you say, because of course what you then do is you call the bluff of those idiotic, largely Tory MPs who say, Scotland can sod off anyway then, beat it. You know, we subsidise you, you're subsidy junkies, we give you, you know, we look at public expenditure in Scotland, blah blah blah, right? And of course they're the knuckle trailing Neanderthal men, aren't they? They're not on message as far as the UK is concerned and the state's concerned. They're desperate to keep Scotland in the United Kingdom, and you rightly, perhaps ominously suggest, and rightly so, they will throw everything they have at making sure that independence doesn't happen. But as far as their strength is concerned, my fundamental argument is they will, and I expect them to, and you shouldn't expect anything else than full onslaught for them. But fundamentally, the majority will of the Scottish people will decide, not the influence from London is unwelcome.
That's the thing that concerns me. I mean, what we're talking about really are the people that are going to take an interest in voting, stuff like this. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the voting history for local authority elections, for national elections and stuff like that, it's only a tiny minority of people that actually vote.
Yeah.
So they're going to decide what's going to happen for the rest of the people, as opposed to reaching out to the rest of the people and giving them a sense of some kind of ownership of this. I didn't see that. Sorry, I'm probably preempting the thing tomorrow night, but I'm not going, so what?
We'll video and you can ask the question on your behalf. No, but I think there's 2 things. Oh, sorry, did you want to ask?
Just one question, it may be really quite stupid actually. Do you think there is any possibility, however remote it might be, that Simon might cancel the referendum?
Why?
Well, I'm raising that question because, you know, he has been moving very much to the right all the time. and it may be the end of him if he doesn't get what he wants.
Well, let me take you to two things, because I put in a submission to the, you know how the government asks for submissions to the referendum thing, and Matt, the issue you raised about voting, you know, and when you look at electoral politics in Scotland, whether it's for the council, whether it's for the Scottish Parliament, Westminster Parliament, European Parliament, it's hard not to draw the conclusion that electoral politics in Scotland has become some middle class parlour game, because half the people don't vote. In local government elections, it's nigh on 3/4. They don't vote, and when you look at who does vote and who doesn't, the poorest areas of this city, the turnout is half what it is in the richer areas. It's the same the length and breadth of Scotland. And in the submission to the referendum bill, one of the questions is, are you in favour of 16 or 17-year-olds having the vote in this referendum? And I wrote back, I said, yeah, I'm in favour of 16. I have a 16-year-old daughter. She's at high school. She follows what's going on in the world. Perfectly capable of understanding the issues involved, and therefore I believe she's entitled to participate in a vote that affects her and her country as much as anyone else. But I wrote, however, this is your point, I would be concerned that 16 and 17-year-olds might think it's so tedious and boring, especially the way the debate has gone so far, that the bigger challenge might be engaging them at all. Not worried that they're all going to turn out in droves and go, I haven't a clue, just put Mickey Mouse on the ballot paper because I'm only 16. You know, that kind of patronising argument that's out there. I think the bigger challenge is, they'll say, why should I? If Alex Salmon's saying it's nothing going to change, and I've just left Liberton High School with 5 hires, and I can't get a job anywhere, and I can't go to university because it's 9,000, blah blah blah. It's getting too close to home. That whole debate, I think the engagement here is a wider issue, but I see, I think the key here, the magic key, the golden key, whatever metaphor you like to use, is people in this country are interested in politics. You're damn right they are. They're passionate about it. They follow it on TV, the radio, they tweet it. They're as passionate about politics as they've ever been. And they don't vote. Work it out. And it's because they're saying, and I often say this to people, yeah, come along election. People are passionate about voting. They want to see this happening. They want to see that happening. And they get a choice of candidates, which is death by fire, death by drowning, death by poisoning, death by asphyxiation. And this is where I usually stand up after the SSP and go, choose life. Anyway, but the truth of the matter is, that's often what you confront, aren't you? And in recent times, and somebody's alluded to it twice, there hasn't been Scottish Socialist Party candidates everywhere. Hasn't been in my constituency because I was standing somewhere else. And I had to get into the ballot paper and look at these 4 haddies. So I did what every, self-respecting socialist should do. I wrote vote socialist at the bottom and put it in, right? But, so the issue here is, I think people are passionate about politics, but they're now extremely querulous about whether or not politics changes through the ballot box and electoral politics, or it changes elsewhere. And in Tarlochan's question, I think it's fascinating. What you're driving at here is there's an immense sort of focus now taking place. Alex Salmond is apparently the only politician in the country who's arguing for this second question. Labour don't want it, the SNP don't want it officially, the Tories don't want it, and the Liberals don't want it. All those parties' policy is one question, let's get it done, let's get it answered succinctly and clearly, and let's move on. Salmond is the only person who's arguing for a second question. And what you have to fathom here is why. Is it because, as many believe, he's gave up the ghost in independence? He looks at the polls, can he be won? We're in for a hammering, dive for a safety, go for an outlet, which says, hey, second question, that'll do, is more powers for the Scottish Parliament, no independence, but we're going to get humptied anyway, right? That's one side of it. And the other side of it is, and I'll probably divulge in the way of answering the question what side I'm in. The other side of it is that this guy is really clever. Salmond is playing the game, which is to say, we're going to argue for a second question because the majority of people in Scotland want it. The churches want it, the voluntary organisations, the STUC, all the submissions will come out in October. The overwhelming majority of people who put in a submission say they want 2 questions. And I'm in favour of giving the people of Scotland what they want. Freedom, second question, right? Give them a second question, that's what they want. Only to find, the Tories again won't give us the second question that we want. What can you say? These unionist parties denying the people of Scotland the second question that is their birthright, right? And they say, well, look, there you are, I fought for it. What can you say? I'm on your side, but there you are. You just have to vote for independence, right? That's the two sides of it. I've tried as best I could to show you where I stood, right? I don't have much time for the second one, but I don't. Will he cancel it? Well, Salmon's a shrewdie. If he thought he was going to lose Salmon's most precious interest, is Alex Salmond. Not you, not me, not the people of Scotland. He's most interested in himself. And if he thought he was in for a hammering, then it is conceivable he would pull the referendum. But it's desperately dangerous for him because he could lose anyway. He loses in those circumstances. It's about organised retreat, isn't it? If he decides he's going to pull the referendum, it's because he's going to get hammered, and his calculation might be, well, he's going to pull it because he's feared he'd get a bigger hammering if he pursued it. You know, I think that becomes too Machiavellian for me. I think you'll have the referendum, and I think we have to fight for it, and I still believe it's winnable. I do. I know just saying that, I think it's winnable. There's 2 years to go. As I said before, you've got the referendum. You've got to persuade those people who don't participate in elections, those people whose jobs, livelihoods, pensions, everything is at risk, that they should support independence to make sure their standard of living is protected and improved. And I think that's an argument you can win.
I think that's a good point to...
yes, let's move to the singing, Mark.
Let's move to the singing, yeah, why not?
Has everybody got one of these in your chair?
Everybody should have.
Hands up, anybody who's ever heard of this song before. Ah, excellent. So, can you guys start us off? Because I'm not going to don't worry. Feel free to stand up, sit down, shout it out, whisper it, mime it, whatever you like. John Redwood, you can mime the Welsh national anthem, right? So it goes like this, right? Rock the wind in the clear day's dawning, was the clouds he'll stir gaudy early. But there's ne'er nor a rock wind blowing through the great glen o' the world's the day. It's a thought that would gather rottens, and the rogues I gang gallus fresh and gay, tag the road and seek other loanings, where their ill ploys to sport and play. Nay, ne'er will our bonny callants march to war when our braggarts grousely craw, nor we wains frae Petite and Clachan mourn the ships sailing down the Broomielaw. Broken fane we's in lands we've harried, will curse Scotland the brave, nae mair, nae mair. Black and white ain't to lead their merriment, mark the vile barracks of their meisters there. Say, come ho, ye attain wi' freedom, never heed what the hoodies croak for doom. In your house, o' the bairns o' Adam, wilf and breed, barley brie and painted room. When Maclean meets we's friends in Springburn, all the roses and keens will turn to bloom. And yon black boy for yon Nyanga dings the fell gallows o' the burghers doon. Well done! Okay, cheers for everybody. Well done, the singers at the back. I can barely hear you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, that was great.